Good morning. I'm Judge Frank Caprio. Throughout my 38 years on this bench, I thought I had seen every form of human frailty, every excuse, and every shadow of regret. But what unfolded in my courtroom on this particular Tuesday morning was something that didn't just challenge the law, it insulted the very soul of our democracy. Imagine a person who doesn't just hold an office but believes they are the office, someone who looks at the scales of justice and sees only a price tag. Today, we aren't talking about a simple traffic violation or a minor lapse in judgment. We are talking about the moment a sitting mayor, a man sworn to serve his citizens, stood where you are standing and told me with a straight face and a heart full of ice, "Judge, you don't understand. I own this city," and the silence that followed those words was the loudest thing I've ever heard in this chamber. It is October 24, 2024, and while the air in Providence is crisp, inside Courtroom 4B the atmosphere is suffocating. With benches packed not with the usual crowd but with cameras, high-priced investigators, and the heavy scent of expensive cologne and political influence as the case of the city of Providence versus Mayor Richard Sterling is called. Mayor Sterling is not just a politician but a titan. For 12 years his face on billboards and his name on bridges, walking with a gait that suggests the ground should feel honored beneath him. 64 years old, silver-haired, wearing a suit worth more than most in this room earn in 6 months. Yet he is here not for a ribbon cutting but because on September 12 at 1:15 a.m. his black SUV was clocked at 85 miles per hour through a residential school zone where children walk every morning, ignoring 3 red lights, nearly striking a delivery van, and when finally stopped he didn't apologize but blew cigar smoke into a young officer's face and handed over his gold mayoral pin instead of his license, asking, "Do you know who I am? This car doesn't stop for red lights. This car owns the road." As I look at him across this mahogany bench, I see a familiar yet deeply disturbing look, one I see in people who have forgotten what it means to be an ordinary citizen. In his eyes I don't see a defendant but a man who thinks this trial is a performance, an inconvenience to be erased with a phone call, because power is a dangerous drug that blinds a man to those he is meant to protect and makes him forget that the laws he signs apply to his own hand. Today, in this courtroom, we will find out whether the title of mayor is a shield for corruption or whether the law still has teeth to bite those who believe they are too big to fail. "Mr. Sterling," I begin, my voice dropping to command the room, "you are charged with reckless endangerment, multiple counts of felony speeding, and abuse of public office. How do you plead?" The mayor doesn't even stand straight, leaning against the podium like he's at a cocktail party, a smirk on his lips, glancing at his lawyer and then back at me as he says, with dripping condescension, "Judge Caprio, let's not waste the taxpayers' time with these formalities. We both know how this ends. I've built this city, I've funded this court, and I think it's time we had a real talk about who's really in charge here." The room goes cold because this isn't just a plea, it's a declaration of war against the very idea of justice, and as I remove my glasses and set them slowly on the desk, I realize this is no longer about a speeding ticket but about the heart of our legal system. There is a particular kind of silence that falls when words are so outrageous the mind struggles to process them, and when Mayor Richard Sterling leaned back and said, "I own this city," the court reporter froze, the bailiff instinctively shifted his weight, and I simply sat there, taking a slow, deliberate breath as his arrogance hung in the air like toxic fog. "Mr. Sterling," I said calmly, "I want the record to be perfectly clear. You are standing in a court of law under oath and suggesting that your political status grants you ownership over public roads, the safety of our children, and the institutions meant to hold you accountable. Is that your official position?" He didn't flinch, instead letting out a dry laugh and scanning the room for approval, his posture and expansive gestures revealing a man accustomed to unquestioned power, consumed by the illusion of invulnerability after years surrounded by yes men, seeing not a judge but an obstacle. "Judge Caprio, let's be realistic," he replied aggressively, boasting of billions in development, stadiums built, departments appointed, insisting that when he's in a hurry it's because the city is in a hurry, and claiming the officer who stopped him didn't understand the hierarchy and needed saving from an embarrassing mistake. As he spoke, I watched his hands and eyes drift toward the press, speaking not to the court but to the cameras, reframing recklessness as leadership, a classic tactic of corruption. "The hierarchy," I repeated, "because in this courtroom there is only one hierarchy, and it begins with the Constitution, not a donor list." I signaled for the evidence, and the body camera footage played, showing the black SUV tearing through the school zone, the engine roaring with total disregard for life, the stop itself, and the mayor's face lit by red and blue lights. Not the face of a leader, but of a man offended that the world had not moved aside. On the spot, we hear Sterling's voice through the speakers, distorted but unmistakable, telling the officer to roll back to her station and inform her captain that Richard Sterling is moving, threatening that if she doesn't comply she'll be walking a beat at the docks by Monday. The courtroom falls into complete silence as the mayor's lawyer desperately tries to whisper in his ear, only to be brushed off, because Sterling is addicted to his own voice and the feeling of being untouchable. I lean forward and say that the officer he threatened has a name and a family, and that she was the only one in that school zone actually doing her job to protect the city, reminding him that he doesn't own the city, he was supposed to serve it, and for the first time his smirk falters, a nervous twitch appearing at the corner of his eye as he struggles with being told no. Evidence and video may be powerful but cold, so to understand the depth of his arrogance I decide to introduce him to someone he didn't notice that night, calling Mrs. Gable to the stand, a woman in her late 70s who has lived in that school zone for 45 years and was walking her small terrier when the mayor sped through, nearly knocking her over with the force of his SUV. As she approaches the podium, trembling from trauma rather than age, the contrast is clear between a man who believes himself untouchable and a woman who represents the soul of the community, yet Sterling barely acknowledges her, checking his gold watch in boredom. Mrs. Gable softly recounts hearing the engine like a jet, the SUV screaming past without braking at stop signs or red lights, frightening her dog and making her feel invisible, and when she looks up at the mayor she tells him she voted for him 3 times but realized that night she was just an obstacle. Sterling's response is chilling as he whispers dismissively to his lawyer about litigating a scared dog, drawing gasps from the courtroom and igniting a controlled fury within me, because this is the moment his arrogance becomes dangerous and reveals his complete disconnection from the people he claims to serve. I tell him this is the most necessary thing happening in the city today, because while he was busy owning the city, Mrs. Gable was busy surviving his ego, and that the hierarchy he claims to sit atop is built on people like her, and if they move, he falls. As Mrs. Gable returns to her seat, the public judgment in the room is already clear, but the case is far from over, because cornered men reveal their true selves, and realizing intimidation has failed, Mayor Sterling approaches my bench, ignoring the bailiff, and leans in to whisper about handling things like adults, signaling his final, fatal move toward a backdoor deal. He leaned in and explained how the world works, reminding me I had a pension to think about and that the city had projects needing his signature, suggesting we call it a misunderstanding caused by stress and offering a significant donation to any educational fund I chose so we could resolve things civilly and forget the rookie officer's mistake. The sound of a man who believes everyone has a price, because he wasn't offering a donation but attempting to bribe a municipal court judge in broad daylight, convinced the law was a vending machine where money buys outcomes. I felt sadness not for him but for the city that trusted him for 12 years, so I let him finish digging a hole no political connection could pull him from, then coldly asked if he was suggesting the court ignore evidence in exchange for a donation, to which he winked and said leaders take care of each other, prompting me to instruct the clerk to capture every syllable because he had just elevated a speeding violation to attempted judicial bribery, a third-degree felony. The color drained from his face, his lawyer buried his head in his hands, knowing Sterling had destroyed his life in seconds, and I reminded him that while he thought the city's wheels were greased by favors, the law is an anchor now tied firmly around his neck, ordering the bailiff to secure the bench microphone video because this was no longer a traffic ticket but a pattern of systemic corruption. The mayor who claimed to own the city now looked small, fumbling with his tie and glancing toward the exit as he realized the hierarchy he boasted of doesn't exist in these walls, where he is only a man who tried to corrupt justice, yet the most shocking part remained, because he wasn't the only one with secrets. As he sat sweating through his expensive shirt, thinking friends and donors could clean this up, he didn't know I'd received a folder from the city auditor moments earlier. And when I spoke again the room went silent as I told him that while he claimed ownership through bridges and stadiums, a report in my hand, the Sterling Legacy File, told a different story of how those projects were funded. As I opened the blue folder and waved down his lawyer's objection, the hierarchy he relied on became the weight crushing him, revealing through audits that the donations he offered didn't come from his own account but from a discretionary fund meant for school lunches and park maintenance, showing that while he sped through school zones he was siphoning millions from the very departments meant to protect them, and as the truth surfaced, his arrogance evaporated and his face turned sickly pale. A gray shade settles over his face, the purest form of physiognomy, as the mask of a great leader slips to reveal a petty thief beneath, his eyes fixed on the blue folder like a loaded weapon because it proves his so-called ownership of the city was theft from its citizens. I tell him he didn't build stadiums to help children but because contracts went to companies he privately owned, that he wasn't owning the city but renting its soul and charging taxpayers for the privilege, an outrage for everyone who worked honestly for decades while he stood above people like Mrs. Gable with his hands in their pockets. He tries to speak but only silence comes, the sound of a man who has run out of road, and I announce the documents are being referred to the State Attorney General and the FBI, promising that before the corruption trial there will be accountability for public safety and abuse of power, because the city he claims to own is about to evict him. Reporters type furiously, his lawyer packs up, yet the final ruling is still coming, beginning with a question he never expected to answer, the moment when legal jargon fades and moral reckoning begins. Looking at him, I see not just traffic violations or stolen funds but toxic arrogance, a man who traded integrity for a gold pin and title. And as I lean forward I tell him that from this bench I see not pride but shame at being caught, not remorse for endangering Mrs. Gable or stealing from school lunches but regret that his hierarchy collapsed into a house of cards. This is the ego trap, the moment of truth for those who believe honesty matters, as his once confident face twitches and his hands grip the podium in fear. I remind him that his request for a private deal insulted every hard-working citizen, that unlike a desperate man stealing bread, he stole out of greed and entitlement, and I explain my philosophy that the law must have a heart for those with nothing but a sword for those who try to poison it, because he didn't just break the law, he tried to buy it. You tried to turn this courtroom into your private boardroom, I said, and the gallery nodded in solemn agreement, witnessing not just a mayor losing his status but the defense of justice against corruption. Sterling's lawyer stared at the floor, unable to defend the despicable actions of his client, who embodied the corruption that makes people lose faith in government. I told him he was the reason people think the system is rigged, and today I would prove to him, to the city, and to everyone watching that the system is only as strong as those who refuse to be bought. The mayor's eyes finally fell, hollow, the arrogance gone, replaced by the chilling realization that his reign had ended, yet one more person remained to whom he needed to apologize, and it wasn't me. The courtroom had shifted from political grandstanding to the solemn expectation of justice. Mayor Richard Sterling stood with his head bowed, his expensive suit now a shroud for his dead career. I addressed him coldly, telling him that he had come in believing his title was a get-out-of-jail-free card, that bullying an officer and attempting to bribe the bench would maintain his illusion of invincibility, but that illusion was over. I reminded him that in America, the only true owners of a city are its people, and they had rejected him. I raised my gavel but paused to let him feel every word. On the charge of reckless endangerment in a school zone, I found him guilty, on felony speeding and resisting arrest, guilty, on abuse of public office, guilty, and on attempted judicial bribery, guilty. With each verdict, he flinched as if struck physically. But the final twist remained. For his crimes against the community's safety, I sentenced him to the maximum term of 1 year in county jail with no early release, imposed a $50,000 fine from his personal accounts frozen pending the FBI investigation, and signed an emergency order stripping him of all mayoral authority, effective immediately. You tried to turn this courtroom into your private boardroom, I said, and the gallery nodded in solemn agreement, witnessing not just a mayor losing his status but the defense of justice against corruption. Sterling's lawyer stared at the floor, unable to defend the despicable actions of his client, who embodied the corruption that makes people lose faith in government. I told him he was the reason people think the system is rigged, and today I would prove to him, to the city, and to everyone watching that the system is only as strong as those who refuse to be bought. The mayor's eyes finally fell, hollow, the arrogance gone, replaced by the chilling realization that his reign had ended, yet one more person remained to whom he needed to apologize, and it wasn't me. The courtroom had shifted from political grandstanding to the solemn expectation of justice. Mayor Richard Sterling stood with his head bowed, his expensive suit now a shroud for his dead career. I addressed him coldly, telling him that he had come in believing his title was a get-out-of-jail-free card, that bullying an officer and attempting to bribe the bench would maintain his illusion of invincibility, but that illusion was over. I reminded him that in America, The only true owners of a city are its people, and they had rejected him. I raised my gavel but paused to let him feel every word. On the charge of reckless endangerment in a school zone, I found him guilty. On felony speeding and resisting arrest, guilty. On abuse of public office, guilty. And on attempted judicial bribery, guilty. With each verdict, he flinched as if struck physically. But the final twist remained. For his crimes against the community's safety, I sentenced him to the maximum term of 1 year in county jail with no early release, imposed a $50,000 fine from his personal accounts frozen pending the FBI investigation, and signed an emergency order stripping him of all mayoral authority, effective immediately.